A Monmouth University, New Hampshire poll released Thursday shows Pete Buttigieg with 20% support among registered Democrats and unaffiliated voters likely to participate in the primary there. Joe Biden is 1 point behind at 19%. Bernie Sanders has 18%, and Elizabeth Warren has 15%. Also on Thursday, Pete Buttigieg won his first endorsement from Maryland Congressman Anthony Brown, a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Former candidate Julian Castro endorsed Elizabeth Warren earlier this week, and Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti is endorsing Joe Biden. Let's bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Dan Balz. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter, and Dan is chief correspondent covering politics for the Washington Post. Welcome to both of you. Caitlin, let me start with you. What has the Buttigieg campaign been saying about this endorsement by Congressman Brown?
Well, they're promoting this endorsement because this comes at a time that while Pete Buttigieg is doing really well in New Hampshire and Iowa, in the more diverse states, he's not doing as well. And that's because he's been really struggling to attract support from African-American voters. The campaign has been trying to make up for that, making multiple trips. He released an ad recently geared towards all the early states, but in South Carolina, he had African-American constituents from South Bend talking about his experience. So this is a way for the campaign to start to get this kind of support. Now, they're both veterans. They're both Harvard graduates. The key here is whether this can help him expand support, whether this congressman can help kind of serve as a credential for him.
Right. Well, Dan, you recently wrote that, quote, endorsements in presidential campaigns often have little impact, but sometimes they do help to clarify priorities and choices as voters decide whom to support. So, Dan, what examples of that have you seen in this campaign cycle?
Well, one of the questions that Democrats are searching for an answer to is the question of, is there a candidate in the field who can both truly energize the base of kind of what we call the new Democratic Party, younger voters, younger women, people of color, versus is there somebody who can also bring out the voters who switched to Trump in 2016 or who stayed home in 2016. And they're the two youngest members of the class of 2018, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who represents a very liberal district in New York, and Representative Abby Finkenauer, who represents a real swing district in northeast Iowa, have gone in different directions. AOC, as we call her, has endorsed Bernie Sanders, and Finkenauer just recently endorsed Joe Biden. And what you see in those two endorsements is essentially the embrace of competing paths to try to figure out who's the best person in the general election. And what Democrats are going to have to decide, Democratic voters, is it an either-or choice? Do they have to pick a candidate who can do A or B, or is there somebody who can prove over time that they can do both? And I was struck by the role that the two youngest members of the caucus are playing in this campaign.
Yeah, it really is quite the contrast. Dan, you also wrote that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's endorsement of Senator Sanders last year gave him a boost after his heart attack. Does Joe Biden need boosts in the form of endorsements?
I think everybody needs a boost. Everybody's looking for people who will verify them, who will expand their support. And it's interesting. I mean, Joe Biden already has the support of people like John Kerry, the former Secretary of State, who was also the 2004 Democratic nominee. He has Tom Vilsack and Vilsack's wife, Christy Vilsack. Vilsack's the former governor of Iowa, very popular figure in that state. And yet they were very happy to get the support of Congresswoman Finkenauer. One, she's younger, and we know that Biden's support among younger Democrats trails behind Bernie Sanders. So they're looking for whatever help they can get. But historically, endorsements are of marginal value. These candidates have to go out and earn it on their own.
Well, Caitlin, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti is endorsing Joe Biden for president. Has the Biden campaign been courting Garcetti?
Well, Garcetti is someone that a lot of these candidates have wanted in their corner because obviously he represents Los Angeles, and California is such a big key primary state. It's going earlier in the cycle. It's a huge, diverse state, and it takes a lot of money to campaign there. And we talked to Garcetti during the debate last month in Los Angeles, and I asked him if he was going to endorse, and he said that he kind of wanted to wait at that point to see who came out of Iowa ahead. So it's significant that he's doing this now. It shows that he wants to put his support behind Biden. Does it signal that someone like Garcetti, who's considered a rising star in the party, who thought about running for president himself, is putting his weight behind Biden now? That's certainly something that the campaign wants to promote. And this is someone who can kind of be out there campaigning for Biden in a state like California, and kind of helps to elevate his profile there.
Caitlin, we mentioned that New Hampshire poll earlier.
Yeah.
Elizabeth Warren had 15% support, but in September, she had 27% and was leading that poll. So what is her campaign doing here in the weeks before the first nominating contest to try to stop that apparent slide in support?
That's right. And we've seen in our poll, too, she's been losing liberal voters to Bernie Sanders in Iowa and New Hampshire. So that's significant as well. It's really interesting to see what she's been doing, or where you've been seeing her this week, for example. She's been doing lots of media interviews, which she typically hasn't done much of throughout this campaign, instead focused on rallies. I was with her in Brooklyn earlier this week, where she had a rally where she campaigned with Julian Castro. That endorsement the campaign sees as an energy boost for her, trying to show her support. So they've been very focused on that. You've seen her on late night TV shows. You've seen her on Sunday shows. You saw her on The View earlier this week, and doing some other interviews as well. So this, I think, is an acknowledgement by the campaign, if not explicitly, that they have to kind of be getting out there and getting some more momentum. They do argue, though, that they have a grassroots organization on the ground in Iowa that can carry this through, and that's, of course, important in a caucus.
Yeah. Well, Dan, you write that Democrats are, quote, still looking for the candidate who can mobilize and persuade, and aren't sure yet who that is. Is there any one thing you think that would convince them of who can actually do both here?
Well, winning is always important, and I think we're sort of at that stage in the campaign when polls become less important and voter perceptions and ultimately voter decisions really matter. We know that in Iowa there are a lot of people who are undecided. They may say, I am basically for Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren or whoever, but many of those supporters are soft supporters. And what we're going to see is a very aggressive effort on the part of all of these campaigns in the final few weeks ahead of Iowa to turn that soft support into hard support, into people who come out at the caucuses. Iowa will have an influence on New Hampshire one way or the other. And we've always seen the week between Iowa and New Hampshire that the New Hampshire order of finish can change. And so if you're in, let's say, Elizabeth Warren's situation, where she has fallen back at this point, there is still potentially time for her to recover in Iowa and then use that to go into New Hampshire. But if she has a bad finish in Iowa, that could certainly affect a state like New Hampshire, where, because she's from neighboring Massachusetts, she should normally have some kind of advantage, as does Senator Sanders.
Well, Dan, former Chicago mayor and Obama White House aide Rahm Emanuel told the Associated Press this week that a Sanders candidacy makes it harder for Democrats to win swing voters in battleground states. Can you elaborate on where that concern is coming from?
Well, I think that Mayor Emanuel, who is a centrist Democrat, not a left Democrat, believes that these elections in general in November are won at the center. And that Sanders, because of his positions, because of the cost of the proposals that he's put on the table, because of his strong support for Medicare for all, would be seen as too far left for many of those voters that the Democrats need to win Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Pennsylvania. The Sanders argument is, no, we can rally people who might otherwise stay home. I mean, that is part of the argument that we're going to be having. But that's the concern on the part of somebody like Mayor Emanuel.
All right, Caitlin Huey-Burns and Dan Balz, thank you very much.